Hey, it's Ronsley. Welcome to today's episode of Should I Start a Podcast? It's episode 289. And in today's episode, you will learn how business owners use their podcast to create partnerships in their business, as well as learning the underlying psychological phenomenon of being worthy. We talk about that. You'll understand the difference between joint ventures and partners and hear the misconceptions about asking the guests you interview to share your podcast. We will take a deeper look at centers of influence, what it means to have them and how you can create them. You can look forward to rethinking how you interact with partners and how to craft a good ask, as well as using audio messages in your daily routine. But the most important conversation that we have here that you would love is hearing us talk about how to ask better and be more vulnerable in the asking process. Also, the number one question to focus on when asking for what you want. All this and more on this episode of Should I Start a Podcast? And by the way, make sure you listen all the way to the end, because I will break down this episode to give you 3 small steps you can execute right now to help you take this listening experience into an execution experience. Enjoy the show.
Indicator 1, this is launch control. Please advise when pre-flight checklist is complete.
Indicator 1 to control. Pre-flight is complete. All indicators read green.
This is Should I Start a Podcast? A show for business owners looking for tips, tricks, and ingenious hacks when it comes to growing a business using their podcast. This is your host, Ronsley. He's interviewed more than 1,400 people and has been listened to over 5 million times in 133 countries. A TED speaker, author, and a podcast purist who believes that we can use our voices to grow our business and our influence. You know, because every conversion in any business always happens in a conversation. And now, Ronsley.
I'm very excited about today's conversation, especially because I believe that podcasting is not a one-person game. You don't have to believe that you got to do it all yourself. And business is not a one-person game as well. And what tends to happen within business is that there is a tendency to think that you kind of have to do it all yourself. And when you start to ask people for help, it starts to become like, can you help me with my goal, as opposed to, can we partner with purpose? So James, I want to get you to talk about this because I know that you've done so many things and you're very passionate about partnerships especially. How about you give us a quick intro as to what you've done, because you've written so many books and you've done so many amazing things. And then how about comment on partnerships and joint ventures?
Thanks, Ron. So I've written 3 best-selling books that have been translated in more than 10 languages now around the world. I've had my podcast now for about 2.5 years and have been featured on it's about 600 other podcasts, radio and TV shows at this point. And literally every single success in quotation marks that I've ever had in my life is as a result of relationships. It's those relationships that lead to partnerships and so many other things. Like an example of something that I've got coming up this week is a national television show that's going out to what's the population of the US. It's on a major network now to be accessible by 350 million people in the US. And there's been so many amazing things that have happened throughout that. And it's just the latest in a long string of things that have happened as a result of relationships. So I'm intensely passionate about, as Ron knows, about relationships and partnerships and all of that. So basically one of the main fundamental principles of that whole relationship side is give before you get. And if you focus on that and do that really, really well, it's what massively opens up the floodgates to be able to receiving so many things come back. That's the difference between a long-term relationship and true transformation, rather than people who want that transactional relationship and very much about that short term. And a lot of people think, what ifs, especially when they launch a podcast. It's like, oh, what happens if no one listens to my show? Whatever it might be. We all have those lingering doubts. But Ron's and I prefer to really reframe that mindset to all come back to one question. An example of a good question, if you were launching a podcast show, might be, what do I need to do to make sure I launch with 500 listeners? And that's what gets you to work on a plan to be able to make that happen. It's very, very different, but a simple shift in mindset to be able to make that happen.
One of the things that happens with partnerships is that we land up in this partnership zone where we kind of ask everyone for help with my goal. Can you help me with my goal? And kind of expect everyone to just join and jump on the bandwagon. And it's not as simple as that. And I feel like it sometimes comes across as very like icky and labored and not normal. And also when we get into partnerships or joint ventures, we don't know what collaboration looks like and we don't know what success looks like all around. So I am keen to hear, Anna, what your thoughts are, and then maybe let's get into some tactics after that. So Anna, a quick intro, and then maybe your thoughts on partnerships and joint ventures for podcasting and business. And then let's talk about some tactics to get some partnering done with purpose.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's Anna Vicino here. I am a podcaster, fellow podcaster. I've been doing some form of podcasting for like 13, 14 years now, but I'm currently the co-host of the Fitness Confidential podcast. Been doing that for almost 10 years with Vinnie Tortorich, and I've turned that podcast into 2 best-selling cookbooks and now a food brand and an online presence. I don't know if you would call it that, whatever, in the low-carb space. And let me ask you this, Rons, are you guys talking about partnerships, joint ventures in the respect of like partnering up and actually being on mic talent together, partnering up in another way?
All of the above.
Interesting. Well, I can speak from experience, and that is, I come from the world of entertainment. I'm a comic and a voice actor, and I worked on camera for years before I started podcasting. And so I will say that a lot of the create your own content thing really stems from people wanting to get together and people really jiving with each other, which is good because that energy needs to carry you forward through a lot of drudgery and consistent podcasting together. But I also am a huge fan of getting everything in writing as soon as possible. I did not do that when I was younger, and I do that now almost immediately. I just email my lawyer and say, hey, I'm doing this new venture. We're doing this, that, and the other thing. And what do we do? And she sets it all up with a deal memo. It can be just one page. And everything is subject to change. You can change it as you grow, as you move along. But just to have things in writing from the beginning is very important. Vinny and I, when we started, we didn't know each other that well. He had trained me, and I was a food blogger and an actor and a comic, and I didn't really know how I would fit into some guy's fitness podcast. And we found out really quickly that I was the food component to what his message was. So our joint venture started with a verbal agreement and went really quickly to a written agreement. And we've since revised it a couple of times. So I'm a big fan of just communicating everything. But that's kind of my initial thoughts. But usually the creative part of it springs out of, hey, we should do this, that thing that kids do when they're like, hey, let's put on a show in your dad's garage. All right, I'll bring the lights, you bring the wigs, and we'll do it. It kind of is that same energy when you're starting a podcast, even for business, but get the business stuff taken care of along with it.
Yeah. Thanks, Anna. And I think the different parts of partnering and doing joint ventures with people, it starts with that excitement and it starts with that initial conversation. And I believe all your guests are your partners in a lot of ways because they're kind of lending the credibility of their brand and their thought leadership and their ideas to your podcast. And if you've created the podcast in a template that allows you to attract listeners to your business, then all your guests are contributing with their credibility and their brand to making that sound great. So yeah, thanks, Anna. Let's talk about this. I'm sure James has something to say about this because partnering with a purpose and finding a win-win scenario is something that you do regularly, James. You do that often, especially with guests that you interview on your podcast. I'd love if you could give us a rundown on how that happens because it seems like it's effortless to you.
Yeah, effortless after a long, long amount of time of trial and error. So back in a past life, I was actually in charge of getting centers of influence for a financial services company that I was a part of. So that was finding professions that were a complement to the services that we provided in financial planning. So that was mortgage brokers, accountants, solicitors, those types of people. So all of that goes back to looking for a win-win, which is a really big theme of this. But I believe the best way to demonstrate trust and value through that is by giving a lot of stuff first rather than trying to keep score of what that other person has done. And we, Rons and I work with a lot of podcasters. When we hear so often that people, they complain that their guests never share their episode with their audience. If you're not getting the results on the partnership side and the relationship side, it's because you have not incentivized your audience and those relationships to be able to do that. And a lot of people, they're so quick to blame the guest and can get very emotional and very, very angry, but it's actually your fault, not that other person's fault if you haven't done that the right way. So anyone who comes on my show, ideally it will come through a personal introduction. So if there's a friend, I'm always looking for a personal contact rather than doing cold outreach. Cold outreach is fine, but it's not the greatest way to start off the relationship. It's doing a massive amount of preparation behind the scenes because it means that when that interview starts, they know immediately through the questions that you ask and the conversation that you're having that you are a person of substance who has taken the time to really value the effort and the energy and the time that they are giving to you that day. So that's the first part of transformation I'm trying to give before we've even had our contact. and then asking those things about what you can do to really support their mission. I really can't stress enough how much you conduct yourself during the podcast, how critical that is to be able to initiate and create some type of long-term relationship with these people. It's absolutely critical, and it's where 99% of podcasters go wrong in my experience. And then after that is saying to them again, like, what else can I do? I love the mission and everything that you're doing. What else can I do to help you? Or what else are you working on right now that I can do? And wait to hear what they say. There might be an opportunity there. And if they say nothing, you can say, well, look, I recently connected with these 1 or 2 or 3 people. Do you think they would be a good fit? Because I think they might be a great fit to help you with your mission. And if you do that enough, all that does is set up a question for them to turn around and say to you, what can I do to help you? That only happens really when you have given so much value to those people, reinforced it with trust, and really shown that you're willing to go above and beyond to help them. And when they say, what can I do to help you? You better have a good answer. Otherwise, you are leaving so much opportunity on the table. This is a very authentic, organic way of being able to create a foundation for massive relationships that not only gets the person to share the show because they want to, which is a very big difference. When a lot of people book guests on their show, they say, tick a box to say that you're going to share the episode with your audience. If I don't even know you, why would I share your podcast with my audience? So become friends with people, give as much as you possibly can, be very specific about what you can do to help, and then make sure if you've done that the right way, they turn around and ask, what can I do to help you? Make sure that you have got something specific for them to be able to help you with.
Last time we had this really good conversation about not being able to ask or have an ask or even ask for help, or even kind of like, we get asked this a lot in terms of what can I do to help you? And I get asked this a lot, and I really don't have a great answer. We're talking about podcasting for business, obviously, but we're talking about joint ventures and partners and creating long-lasting relationships. So if you have anything to add to that conversation, Anna, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what James said.
Everything James said was spot on. I mean, having guests on, they're kind of like your temporary partner for that week or that episode. And I will say, as somebody who's guested on a lot of podcasts, I always appreciate receiving assets to help me promote that episode. And unless it was like an ungodly, hideous interview, which maybe there's 1 or 2 of those ever, I'm always apt to help promote things to my audience. And, I always need things. I might have to time it out with stuff that I'm already currently promoting, but I like receiving those assets. I remember being on a podcast recently that I loved the interview, had a great time, and then they didn't send me any assets. So I wanted to promote that conversation because it's stuff that I hadn't talked about before. And so I had to kind of chase them down. So it's part of the whole being thorough thing and being a good host to them and giving them the tools that they need, not just a link, but pictures or whatever, quote, something that you said on the interview in a infographic or social media assets is always very helpful. So I just want to throw that in there.
What tends to happen with James, and when James went down that path of the give, how can I support you sort of scenario and supporting the guests, there's a lot of stories about how people just feel like they're giving a lot and not receiving anything back. And I think that tends to happen because when they ask us, what can we do to help? We don't have a great ask. And I wonder whether we can talk about some good asks, because I think that just coming up with some stuff, and I think sometimes we feel like the ask is too big, sometimes think the ask is too small. I'm curious to hear from James or even Sandy or Anna whether there's some good asks, especially when it comes to guests first. Then we can talk about audience next. But there's some good asks when it comes to interviewing a guest and you're having this really great conversation and you have this connection. And when there's this conversation about giving and receiving, everyone gets a bit uncomfortable and probably brushes the conversation aside.
Really, really great and really important question. I think it's important to think about, imagine the people that you're closest with your entire life. Think about your absolute best friends. There should be people in your life that you could text or call or send an audio message or talk to and ask them for damn near anything, and they would do it. That's why I've tried to approach all this stuff, is to try and get as many of those people in my life as possible, where anything that you need, you've got a very, very, very large and growing group of people who are desperate to help you because you've been able to give so much value to them along the way and never really ask them for anything. It's only when they turn around and say, what can I do to help you? That's where you can say, well, since you asked, here's what I'm after. So it comes right back down to the intent of your podcast, if we're talking about podcasting specifically. So is the intent of your show to help you grow? Like, do you want to get high higher profile guests so you can increase your own development? Or is the intent to get them to share their audience so you can build your audience? Or is it so you can increase your network by being around more and more influential people? And your ask is going to ultimately depend on the intention that you have for that. So if you can see that a guest that you've got coming up on your show had previously featured someone who's even more influential and someone that you would love to be connected with, giving the person that you're with now an amazing experience and having a very genuine, meaningful way of asking, if only if they feel comfortable doing so, would they provide an introduction to that other person that you know that they're friends with, can really, really go a long way to getting that result. And that's just one example. And the spot where I think most people fall down is that they don't take the time to follow up. They might ask a question at the end of the podcast and all of a sudden get annoyed when a few days later they haven't heard of anything. Well, those people are going to be very, very busy. Send a follow-up email immediately after the podcast to say, thank you so much for coming on the show. You mentioned wanting this. Here are the steps that I've taken to get that underway, or I've already sent you a separate email to connect you with Anna, who I know you wanted to be connected with. You mentioned also that you'd be willing to provide an introduction to this person. Let me know if there's any information you need from me to be able to make this happen. So that's one follow-up. And then I would do it 5 or 7 days later, follow up again. I know you're super busy. Just wanted to move this to the top of your inbox. As always, if there's anything I can do to help you, just let me know. And that is a way that you can get some specific asks and really get a great result rather than always wondering why people are never getting back to you.
You know, something, and I don't know if James already said this, but something that when I, way back in the day, interviewed James the very first time, there was something you said, James, that really resonated and stuck with me, that you made mention of genuinely following and commenting and helping that person, that guest, that whoever you want to connect, you know, promoting their stuff, often going to their page and commenting or liking or sharing. And then over time, they start to notice you, and then the relationship will flourish from there. And then when you do approach them for another interview or whatever it is, they feel like it's more genuine because you've already made that connection, and that has proven to work when I've tried it.
Yeah, absolutely, Sandy. It's like when people in your network that we mentioned, like the people who are closest to you, those people are desperate to help you. Like I'm desperate to help every single person who's in my phone and people that I'm connected with. But if I don't know what you need, if I don't know the help that you're after, then I can't help you and I won't. But if you've got a very specific thing that I can do and you've laid the foundation perfectly, it's a really great way to be able to amplify your influence and impact and everything else that you're doing.
It's the bit that you spoke about that really hits home all the time is about the ask and not having something to ask. But what tends to happen is that we probably go in not knowing what success looks like, or we have all these varied ways of what success looks like. So we don't really know necessarily what to ask. And then the promise of our show gets convoluted as a result. There's this really great quote, and I think I read it in a Dan Priestley book. And the quote goes like, you get what you pitch for and you're always pitching. That's the first principle of how to actually ask for something or ask for your business and how to put that all down.
I was just thinking, as you were saying that, Ronsley, and saying that quote and just in general making the ask. By the way, I was a political consultant for 8 years back in my late 20s and early 30s. And I was in charge of campaign finance reporting for U.S. members of the House and Senate. And I would constantly be talking to the finance directors, who are the ones who are responsible for getting their candidate to sit down and make phone calls to the donors to get them to donate money. And all the candidates hated making the ask, hated it. And it would be like herding kittens to try to get them to sit down and do it. And I feel like I'm not that much different than that. I think we all have our spots where we're not making the ask as much. We could probably increase that a few, you know what I mean? Make a few more asks every day, make a few more. But also not just to get out of the comfort zone of being comfortable of asking that, but also to see where, like, because when you think of somebody that you're asking something for, thinking too, like, what value am I offering them? And so it's like, you're almost, how do I say this? Not like rehearsing the reciprocation in your head, but you're practicing it. You're constantly practicing it and connecting with more people and making it so that, like, okay, you know what? I always think that, like, I don't know how to grow my podcast, but have I actually sat down and written 3 people a day for 10 days straight? I haven't, if I'm being honest with myself. So I really feel like there's things that we can all do to kind of light that fire under our butts. Just want to put that out there.
Yeah, so good, Anna. Imagine how everyone on here, imagine how your life would change if each day you sent 3 audio messages to people in your network just to check in with them. Just wanted to see how you were doing. As always, if there's anything I can do to help, just let me know. It's life-changing for less than a minute.
Hey, this is Katerina Joubert. I'm a creator, podcaster, and maker of amazing videos. I'm on the inside of We Are Podcast members, or as we call it, the Wamily. If you were thinking about growing your business using a podcast and your online presence, come join us on the inside. I would love to meet you. James and Ronsley coach us to get those reoccurring results in our businesses. If you want the roadmap which we all follow to get those results, you can download it by following this link, roadmap.wearepodcast.com. Now, here's Ronsley.
I wonder how much of this asking bit comes to worthiness, but I wonder how much of us not being able to ask for what we want or even put that intention out there, it comes down to the worthiness aspect.
100% of it. And I think that asking for things, asking for participation, asking for help, as well as even volunteering your services, you're putting yourself out there, you're making yourself vulnerable. And in order to feel vulnerable, you have to feel worthy of being vulnerable, that somebody's going to take you up on it. I have found too, from running businesses, that it is people, whatever their hangups are, obviously on a personal level, you're going to bring it into your business. So I have found like where I have no problem negotiating a rate, let's say, I have no problem doing that. Sometimes that's a trigger for people and they disappear and I don't even realize like, what's happened. Well, they've been triggered and they're gone. And so wherever we can be aware of that, if it's an unworthiness thing that's making us not want to ask like, oh, maybe my podcast isn't well developed enough, or maybe I don't have the numbers to support it, or I have no business emailing the marketing director of this brand to become a sponsor because I'm sure they have bigger podcasts. They have bigger fish to fry. Like we all have those messages in our heads running all the time that we have to constantly go, how much do I have to make myself struggle and pay for my unworthiness before I will just get out of my head and start asking?
It's such a interesting conversation around worthiness because there's so many different layers and deep layers to being worthy. And I wonder how much of this conversation needs to go down that path, because when you are an entrepreneur and you start podcasting for business and you start creating you have a voice for what you do and collect money and have clients and put your work out there, the worthiness piece comes up more often than we care to admit.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in on that. To me, a lot of this unworthiness can be overridden by making something a purposeful habit. Like the more you do it, it's easier for you to override those feelings and that doubt. You get it done almost like you've got that muscle memory from just getting out there and doing it. Like it's just second nature for me in every email and every audio message and things that I send to end now with that, as always, if there's anything I can do to help you, just let me know. And that is what has overridden those feelings that Anna mentioned before, which I still feel. It just doesn't stop me from taking action, whereas for a lot of other people, it takes action. And Sandy, you've got a lot more experience in the broadcasting game than all of us up here do. So I'd love to hear it if you've got any thoughts on that.
No, I think I struggle with the ask too. So I love to learn from you and Ronsley, because sometimes I feel like, and I don't know how many other people in the room feel this, where I'm like, okay, so if I give them the blanket and I would do anything you need, let me know. But that's such a generic phrase that I don't know, like, what can I offer? Do you need to be more specific at times? Like, hey, this is what my expertise is in. If you ever feel like you need me, reach out to me, or I don't know. I'm very uncomfortable with that too, because I feel like the worthiness thing, like what you guys are talking about right now, I think I struggle with as well.
You know, that's interesting. That's a really good observation about how something that might feel too vague doesn't have a boundary in it. And maybe that's why it feels uncomfortable. And I like that idea. For me, I made a New Year's resolution this year. One of my things was to call 2 friends a week that I haven't heard from in a while. And also because I do business with a lot of friends. I'm in like a relationship business that sometimes it's just purely on a personal level, but then other times just from checking in with somebody who I haven't talked to in a while, who I love and I dearly miss, we get to some business stuff after having that personal check-in. So for me, that's my version of what James is doing, because that's what makes me comfortable. I want to check in, and maybe it's a female thing. Like, I just want to connect with somebody that I haven't connected with in a little while. And I don't know, I just wanted to put that out there of like, you get to define what it is, because if you don't know, it's just saying, how can I help you? Reach out for anything. That's not always true. For me, it's not. James probably would do anything because he's a good guy. I'm 20% as good as James is. Let's be honest. Like, I'm not that good of a person. And so I'm like, I do want to help, and I want to do, but then there's sometimes I just feel overwhelmed and overworked. And so I'm scared to make that offer, because what if somebody actually takes me up on it and I feel like I'm about to like beat my head against the wall because I've overcommitted myself. So I get that is all I'm saying.
That can certainly happen, Anna. Like Keith Ferrazzi, who wrote Never Eat Alone and a bunch of other books, New York Times bestsellers, who's very much the modern day Dale Carnegie. He has a team who runs his contacts. He actually uses Salesforce to be able to keep track of all those different things. So it can really get overwhelming. And as Sandy mentioned earlier, when it comes to things like social media engagement, people are much more likely to engage with you if they have seen you in person or heard your voice recently. People start to wean off just having those conversations with people, whether you're sending out audio messages or whatever you're doing, even during a pandemic. That is a way that you can have those touch points with a lot of people recently without having to see people in person. So you can boost your social media engagement because people have heard your voice, even if they haven't seen your face. Seeing people in person, but that's why if you go and have dinner with someone and on Monday you see their post on Instagram, you're like, wow, that's awesome. It's because you remember those recent feelings and those emotions of being with them. So try and replicate those feelings to be able to create more social media engagement for you.
The part that I want to come back to, which I find important, is the vagueness of the ask in terms of like, if there's anything I can do to help you, please don't hesitate to ask me. And I feel that being so generic, this happened recently. I recently lost a friend and I was having a conversation with her sister and I wanted to say the same thing. And I wanted to say, is there anything I can do to help? Which I did say in the end, please don't hesitate to ask. But while I was thinking of that, I was thinking, I'm not being very helpful here because I am giving her the onus to come up with stuff to give me so that I can help. And I'm just saying the right thing to say, hey, if you need anything, I'm here to help. So I was caught in that because I remember having this was like last week. So that probably happens in general. And I'm curious to hear thoughts on this because sometimes we do get asked for something that we can't deliver on because the ask is we're not able to fulfill the ask. For example, we got asked to make an introduction to someone and that person didn't want the introduction. So we had to politely decline the person that needed the introduction. So it was really fascinating how that all went down. James, you asked this question a lot. Do you get people asking you stuff that you can't deliver on or how do you deal with that? And maybe is there a more specific ask?
Yeah, a lot of the asks that have been worked out really well for me and have been enormously valuable for other people are relationships, by being able to say, here is someone that you would potentially get along with or be a great fit for. That's what's worked exceptionally well. And it's funny, Ron's, the example that you mentioned before, that was an example of two super high-level people that Ron's and I were connected with. And when one of these people said, no, I'm okay for the introduction right now that this other person had asked us for, we thought it was a joke at the start. It was like, oh, wow, this is quite awkward now that has manifested. So, and the example that you mentioned before, Ron's, about there's someone who was grieving going through that process. Just reaching out to them and being there and offering that is about probably all that they could handle anyway. Now, if there were other things where if you were on site with them where you could say, look, for example, do you want me to go and handle some of the funeral arrangements or reach out to any people or go and get something printed, like whatever it might be, that's a type of thing that you can suggest. An example of a relationship that worked out really good for me, and sorry, just to go back to Ron's to what you specifically asked, if someone asks me for something that I can't fulfill, and the biggest one right now is time. Like if someone reaches out to me and it's going to require an enormous amount of my time, I'm just like, look, just send me an audio message. I'll get back to you in an audio message. That way, in the space of about 2 minutes, they can get a pretty good idea of what they need help with. But as much as possible, I'm trying to refer them to specific programs or services that I or other people might have that's going to give them a much more comprehensive result. Because through the process that it takes, it's going to start with a much more comprehensive idea of the problem that they're facing. There's someone called Gabby Reese, who is a former volleyball player doing amazing things in the fitness world. And I was able to connect her with the sleep doctor, a guy who'd been on Dr. Oz 40 times. I thought this was a match made in heaven. So I was able to put those people in touch. And the sleep doctor had said to me, we were out at dinner, and he said, I still haven't heard back from Gabby. And I said, well, you will. She's super busy and splits her time in America and Hawaii. And next time I caught up with the sleep doctor, he was over there as a facilitator for their XPT training, and it worked out amazingly well. So Gabby was super happy that I was able to put her in touch with someone that was very, very valuable and able to provide a lot of service to her community and also be on a podcast. And the sleep doctor was super happy because that was someone he'd want to be connected with because he had some cool things he was hoping to test out with that group. So it was a match made in heaven, and they're both very grateful to me for that introduction. So now if I was to reach out to those people, which I haven't, but if I was to reach out to them right now and send an audio message with something specific that I wanted, maybe someone influential, high profile, who they've either had on their podcast or I know that they're connected with, my chances of getting a yes or even a response are much greater than they would have been if I wasn't able to provide them some type of value, like being able to connect them with someone who could be a good fit to be able to further their mission. So, and every person who comes on my podcast, I ask them this question, like, what's one thing on your bucket list? And as much as possible, I try and remember that. Like, there's a guy, Mike McAllowitz, I had on my show, and an example of his bucket list goal was to appear as a guest on, a guest host on Saturday Night Live. That's just embedded in my brain that there's an opportunity now where if I'm ever in a position to be able to make that happen, because Mike would be amazing for that, then I would reach out to him out of the blue and say, here, I've been able to set this up for you. You mentioned that was a bucket list goal. That's something that would completely change his life. He would be blown away. So as many of those things that you can embed on your mind, but the relationship piece, who do you know as you continue to level up your network that you can connect with other people if there's a legit fit there based on how well you know all the people involved? That's a really great way of being able to advance everyone's interests.
So did that just work for you gradually, James? Because, I mean, you are so well connected, but for some of us who are not as connected as you, was it just a gradual, hey, let's just start from the people that I do know, and then it just builds and grows from there?
Yeah, it's a really great question, Sandy. So I think anyone who's thinking about that needs to think about what medium do they have of being able to reach out to these people who could potentially be just an awesome person to have in their network. So for me, I started off, I had a social media brand that built up almost 500,000 followers back in the day. And as part of that, I was interviewing mainly athletes, like very, very successful people who I'm still connected with today, because that was an opportunity for me to share them on this platform that I was able to slowly build up based on a lot of those things. So making sure that you've got some type of forum. That's why a podcast is so great. Last week, Holly mentioned that nothing kicks the door open like a podcast. And I really believe that. I had a guy on my show last week who's doing $120 million a year in annual recurring revenue for his business. Do you think I would have been able to get a one-on-one coaching session with him? Absolutely not. Or it might have been $100,000, if not more. But the two of us were able to catch up in the studio for an hour where I could ask him anything that I wanted to ask about how to scale a business. And now we're on each other's phones and connected. And that's a great way of doing that. So on the condition that you've got a medium, if your goal is to expand your network, tap into the people that you're already connected with to say, who are the most influential people? Get a list of those people. And then it's really important that you have a good reason as to why that introduction should take place. For example, look, my mission for the next 12 months is to ABC because of XYZ. I know that you're connected with this person. Would you feel open to making an introduction? As always, what can I do to help you? Doing something like that, even if 50% of the people get back to you or even 25% of the people, it just becomes a numbers game because you're just out there. And that's the process of doing that now. Like I moved to America where I didn't know anyone. And now I've got a much better network in America than I do in Australia. So it takes a lot of time. You need a medium to be able to do that, which anyone can start. Anyone can launch a podcast. And to start off with, make sure that you tap into the people that you know already. Start where you are. You don't need to wait. Just start where you are with the people that you've got and you can make it happen from there.
Oh my God, James. First of all, this is why I say James is a better human than the rest of us, because he remembers that a guy said that he wants to be a guest host on SNL, and James will probably find a way to make that referral happen. He's such a good egg. I couldn't agree more with using your personal network. That sounds using your personal network. God, I sound like an asshole. I'm like one of those LA a-holes. But let me give an example. So early on when Vinny and I were first podcasting, one of my good friends, her name is Jessica, and she's very well connected with a lot of different worlds, the blogger world, with the radio world, with the Adam Carolla people. Also, somebody I was connected with from a long time ago was Dr. Drew, because he loved the show that I was on because he thought it represented what the early days of radio were like. And so I was connected because he liked the show and great. And Vinny would ask me early on, call everybody you know, get Jessica involved, get Dr. Drew, get these people going. And I would say, hold on, it's not that I was putting on the brakes for any reason other than I wanted to make sure we had the momentum and we were ready to call on all these things, because when you're ready to call on that network, people will generally, especially your very menschy people, all the mentions in your life will want to help you. I know I'm the exact same way. And now I will tell people too, if they come to me for help, I will say, hey, yes, let's do this. I'll make an intro to so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so. Or I'll say, you know what, get more ready. You're not ready yet. You need to get ready. And then because you get one shot with some of these people. And so I just wanted to put that out there, that I agree with tapping into your personal network, because there are those people in there who really want to help. And then, of course, you just got to be ready for the opportunity.
That bit you said at the end there, Anna, is so I can share a quick story here. So when I had moved to LA, I was super connected after a while with people through that brand that I had mentioned previously. And there was a guy I was good friends with, and I was meeting him at a cafe, and Tim Ferriss walked past. There was no one else around. Me and Tim Ferriss, I was waiting for a friend who was a mutual friend of Tim and me, who was actually the guy that helped Tim with all the calisthenics stuff. And I've been a massive fan of Tim Ferriss for a long, long time and would have done anything to be able to have just some FaceTime with him. But I did not have a medium to be able to really connect with him. I could have met him, like I could have said, hey, Tim, and stopped him in the street like a raving fan, but nothing, and maybe got a photo and stuff. I'm sure Tim would have been fine with that, but nothing tangible from there would have happened. But if that exact same situation happened now, I've got multiple ways of being able to do that. So making sure that when you know that you've got a good situation, like you don't want to blow it up by being too premature when you're ready. So what you said, Anna, there, I thought was really important.
That's awesome. And I forgot to say that the punchline of the whole thing is that because of that little tiny intro from Jessica, eventually when it was time to make that intro, now Vinny is Adam Carolla's fitness guy. And we direct a lot of traffic to our podcast because of it and all the other things, and reconnected with Dr. Drew when the time was right. So just wanted to put that out there. But yes, agreed.
So good. James, you could have taken a selfie. No, I'm joking. That's not like you. Sean, I'm keen to hear your voice and keen to hear your thoughts. That you've been around probably since the start. So what's up, man? How are you?
Thanks for having me, Ronsley. I really enjoy the conversation. James, Anna, Sandy, all great. Sounds like James's bucket list is getting Tim Ferriss on his podcast. So I'll put that in my back pocket. And if I can ever make that happen, I'll go ahead and do that for you, James.
I appreciate it, Sean. The seed is planted. I love it.
You got to tell the universe. I'm a big believer in podcasting. We've been doing it for our business for the last 4 years. We're a barbecue media company, barbecue restaurant that became a media company. We're about to launch our second podcast called Restaurant Influencers. But my question is for James. You keep talking about audio messages. Are you using these through Instagram, or are you using audio messages in a typical smartphone voicemail type of way?
Yeah, great question. I do them all. I use Facebook Messenger, I use text message and Instagram audio. It's so easy. It's so fast. I want to be able to hear what the person's saying and also to send something back. Like, think about, I just hate the idea of texting because we're so much like a whole bunch of people that you're not super connected with. To text seems very laborious, but to send a quick audio message to someone where you can get sort of 5 times as deep in 1/5 of the time is great. So yeah, Instagram, Facebook Messenger, and text message are the ways that I send audio messages.
And have you tested video messages?
Anything on video is very draining on my energy. I talked to Ron's a bit about this, actually. Anything on audio, I feel like I could do for days. But when it comes to video, I'm usually quite exhausted. So, yeah, I don't do much video. Ron's has done a lot of great stuff with using Loom videos, which is something that I learned from him, which is great. So being able to really share a personal connection about why that person is so important for something that you might need is very valuable through a video. So that is something that can be very...
That's great. I appreciate that. And I'll just leave the stage with my favorite quote from the great philosopher Winnie the Pooh. We will be friends forever. Just you wait and see. So always add value first. I love the room. Great conversation, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, love Winnie as a philosopher. Sean, great to hear your voice. And for the Loom, like James, the question I get asked the most is, can you introduce me to someone? And when I do make the introductions these days, over the last couple of years, I don't make email introductions. I mean, the medium is via email, but I make the introduction via Loom in the sense that I am on the video and I say, hey, James meet Sandy, Sandy meet James. James is amazing for these reasons and Sandy is amazing for these reasons. And this is why I'm connecting you both. Please feel free to take it from here, as opposed to sending that in it goes in an email, but it's a video. And yeah, that's just my new way of connecting people, because I do it less than James does for sure. And I only connect very specific people. So I use video. Maybe last 18 months or 2 years has been my experience. I wonder what you took out of that episode. Now that you've listened to this whole show, I would love you to do 3 small steps that I believe is going to make the big difference when it comes to partnerships in your business and your podcast. Number 1, I spoke about this on the last podcast, but it is valuable here too. So if you listened and haven't done it yet, here is your sign to do it. But if you've already done it, 20 points, good for you. So here it is. If all your previous guests ask you this one question, are you prepared with an answer? The question is, what is the number one thing that I can help you with? The question is, what is the number one thing I can help you with to grow your business? If they ask you that question, do you have a good answer?
Well, spend the next 20 minutes thinking about that and write down 3 to 4 things you could say the next time someone asks you just that question. Number 2, think about the guests you've already interviewed and categorize them. Can some of them help you with being seen more because they have an audience? Can some of them help you with being seen as more credible because their brand is a valuable one and maybe they're seen as an influencer in your industry? Could some of them help you bring more clients? Could some of them help you bring more partners? Maybe they can help you create more content. Whatever it is, categorize your previous guests that you've already interviewed and group them. That's number 2. Number 3, think about 3 high-profile people you would like to have a conversation with in the next year. And who are the people you would have to interview before asking those 3 people to be on your podcast? So the 3 high-profile people that you'd like to have is not someone you'd ask for straight away, but they're people that you'd ask over time. So who would you have to interview before those 3 people would say yes? Spend 20 minutes on this, write them down. These are 3 small steps that if you execute, irrespective of where you are at in your business and podcasting journey, will make a huge impact on making money on your podcast, making it more profitable and more impactful. If this is the first episode you've listened to all the way to the end, or if you're a regular, thank you. I love that you're here. Check out our back catalog on shouldistartapodcast.com. Subscribe to the show and give me a review and rating. It really helps me get found more. If you are a business owner, podcaster, and want to join others like us in a group where we share tactics and ideas on what's working or not for us when it comes to using our podcast in the best possible way, go to wearepodcast.com/group. It's free. Join us in there. We share lots and lots of content. Also, it's happening this year. We Are Podcast 2022. For the latest announcements on Australia's first podcasting conference for business owners, join the free group. Again, that link, wearepodcast.com/group. Stay tuned next week where we are going to cover how you can get your next 1,000 listeners. It includes a lot of really cool conversations that we've had in a group. So don't forget to subscribe to the show to get that episode as soon as it gets released. Until then, much love. All right. So you still till the end. You found this useful and you have a business or you have a podcast and a business and you kind of want to make it work for you and grow your business using this podcast. Well, you know what? That's something that I have helped thousands of people do and thousands of businesses do in different forms, through an agency in a one-on-one fashion, through a conference, in a group, and obviously in courses and stuff. So please, I want to be able to give you something that you can use to get recurring results in your business using a podcast. We call it the Recurring Results Roadmap. It is years of putting this in practice. It is the blueprint to get results and recurring results using a podcast. If you'd like that, send me a message, ronsley@gmail.com. I want to hear from you. I want to hear your voice, or want to hear from you. So if you've listened to this and you want that roadmap, please send me an email, ronsley@gmail.com. I want to hear from you. Much love. I'll see you in the next episode.